In this quiet episode of Cottage DIY, you are welcome to come along with me while I take a gallon of raw milk and turn it into a pound of mozzarella. We're going to create this fresh summertime appetizer for my family. Mozzarella is probably the easiest cheese to make by warming a fresh batch of milk and allowing it to separate into two parts. The solid is a soft curd which becomes our cheese, and the filtered fluid is the golden byproduct called whey, which often gets thrown out, but in our case, we're processing this milk down specifically to get the whey and turn it into a rich body moisturizer. The whey-based body butter is featured over on the Thermal Mermaid YouTube channel if you're interested in learning about that, but some of you may have come over here from that video specifically to make the cheese from what's left over after you've extracted the whey. And that's what we're going to do here. Now, even though making mozzarella is pretty easy, it only takes about 30 minutes from start to cleanup, and you can get a reasonably predictable result every time. One thing that I've learned is that getting your mozzarella to turn out like most of the other YouTube tutorials takes a few tries and it takes a little bit of practice. And in this video, I'm going to give you the step-by-step basics and the tips that I've learned that are a little bit different from what I've discovered from just going through the other tutorials. So let's start by showing you our short list of ingredients for mozzarella making. I will be using 1 gallon of raw milk, 1 teaspoon of citric acid, 1 tablet of rennet, and I'll be using 1 1/4 cups of water. We're also going to be needing some tools and utensils. I'll need a stock pot, a few large bowls, a strainer, and you could also use a cheesecloth or a very fine towel. Before we begin, we're going to prepare the citric acid and the rennet. 1.5 teaspoons of citric acid is going to be dissolved into 1 cup of water, and I'm going to dissolve 1 rennet tablet into a 1/4 cup of water and set these aside. I'm going to pour 1 gallon of cold milk into a stock pot and set the temperature on warm. I want to slowly warm the milk to about 90 degrees, and while the milk is still cold, I'm going to add the 1 cup of water with citric acid and stir this completely into the milk. Once it's completely incorporated, I'm going to leave this alone for just a few minutes and allow to continuously, gradually warm up to 90 degrees. Now, one of the first things that all mozzarella tutorials cover is the milk being both homogenized and pasteurized. In order to get the curd out of the milk, you want this to be as close to original as possible. When your milk is homogenized, it goes through a high-pressure extruder that breaks apart the large fat globules, and it breaks them down into smaller parts. And that makes your drinking milk taste more smooth and even. But it's harder to turn that fat in the milk into cheese curd. So you want to try to get milk that is not homogenized. Now, as time goes on, it seems that there are fewer and fewer choices at the grocery store shelves, and everything's either homogenized or ultra homogenized, unless you're buying it fresh or from a small family farm. In my case, the only way that I can get it is to go to a market 1 town over and buy it raw. So my first tip that varies from most of the tutorials that you'll find online, where you'll be told that your milk must not be homogenized, is that if you only have access to homogenized milk, go ahead and try this recipe. You're going to have to practice a few times before you get your mozzarella down, and it's not going to hurt you to start off by using homogenized milk. What's going to happen is that your cheese is going to be fresh and soft, and it's going to turn out a halfway between the mozzarella and a soft cream cheese, and it's going to taste exactly the same. Now, for most of your fresh mozzarella recipes, this is going to work just fine. Just understand that it's not going to be perfect, as if you are working through the recipe with milk that's not homogenized, and that's okay. Now, this will not work if you buy ultra homogenized milk. In this case, the fat has been forced by pressure into globules that are just too small for it to turn back into cheese curd, and you'll just end up with this sort of a soft slop. So choose non-homogenized milk when you can, homogenized if that's what you have available to you, and don't even bother with ultra homogenized milk. Now, another thing that I've seen the internet tell people is that in order to get the best cheese, your milk should not be pasteurized. So let's talk about that for a minute. Pasteurizing your milk is where the farmer warms the product up to 145 degrees Fahrenheit for a minimum of 16 seconds to kill any potential organism before it's bottled for consumption. If your milk is not pasteurized, it's called raw. Now, for many of you, buying raw milk is not even an option because it's not legal to purchase unpasteurized milk in lots of states. So over the last few years, it's been very trendy to see TikToks or YouTube videos of people buying raw milk, and you may have heard about all of these health benefits of drinking raw milk over pasteurized milk. Now, to be clear, the only thing that pasteurized milk does is warm the product up to a temperature that kills organisms like E. coli and prevents you from getting life-threatening illnesses. According to the FDA website, there is zero health benefit to drinking raw milk over pasteurized milk. There is no additional nutritional value in raw milk, and pasteurizing your milk does not take any nutrition out of the milk. And also, there's no health benefit to drinking raw milk that you can't get from pasteurized milk. The only difference is that pasteurized milk is safer to drink. Now, with that said, getting sick from raw milk, it's not that common. I think as of right now, there are about 12 reports in the United States from the last 10 to 20 years that are published over on the FDA website, and you can read those if you go over there and look for them. Every single one of those involved E. coli contamination. Now, with that said, I'm not worried about raw milk. In my state, it is legal, and so I'm using it here in this demonstration. And I do feel like there's a lot more riskier things that I can do in my kitchen during this activity alone than drinking the raw milk that you see me holding. So being worried about this is not at the top of my list. However, there's no universe that any of the children in my house would be given raw milk to drink. Now, why? Because on the chance of a serious illness, this is 100% preventable, and I'm not willing to risk giving that to them. Now, will I give them cheese made from raw milk? Yeah, because we're going to cook this just close enough to make me happy that this is going to be perfectly fine. And if you're worried, then you can always modify your recipe to make sure that you hit that 145 degree mark for just 16 seconds, and then boom, you've pasteurized your own milk. It's taken about 10 minutes for the warm setting to bring our cold milk with citric acid up to 90 degrees. You can see here in this view that there is some curdling going on, but this is not going to turn into cheese all on its own. We need to get a little extra help. Adding the rennet is going to really pull the curd together and give us something to work with. Now we're going to stir this in until it completely dissolves, and then allow this to sit for about 5 minutes with the heat getting just a little bit more warm. I'm going to let mine get to 110 degrees on medium-low heat, and then I'm going to let it rest for about 5 to 10 minutes, and we're going to let that rennet turn this slightly curdled milk into a more solid form of curds and whey. When we return and lift the lid, we can see that the curd has formed a solid and is floating at the top. I'm going to turn the heat off at this stage and gently cut slices into the surface in a crosshatch pattern. This is going to give me nice solid chunks that are small enough to remove from the pot and transfer into a bowl without damaging the curd. I want to try to keep this together as much as I possibly can, and you can see here that the curd is still really delicate, so I'm trying my best not to damage what is already set up. As for now, the cooking part is done, and it's time to start processing this cheese. Now this is where the practice comes in, and I'm going to carefully transfer this curd into a strainer. Now, you might find it easiest to lay a cheesecloth liner in the strainer and then give that curd an extra layer of protection while we're processing it and pushing out the extra whey. But in this case, I'm only going to use the strainer so that you can see the texture that I'm working with while I'm moving along. Now, it is better to use the cheesecloth, but I feel like for the purposes of this video, you're going to be able to get more out of it by being able to see what's happening. Now, right here is a really good visual of just how delicate the curd still is. I'm going to gently bind the curd together and push that remaining whey out of the cheese. I'm going to work it by folding it together and then applying pressure gently, and that's going to start to strengthen the curd. And I'm just going to do this a few times, and then what we're going to do is give our cheese a little bit of a salt to flavor it. I've just removed a cup of whey and I've warmed it up, and I'm going to dissolve about a teaspoon of salt into the liquid. Then I'm going to set the mozzarella ball into the warm salted whey, and we're going to let that sit for a minute while I just begin to lightly stretch the cheese. This is where the cheese starts to change from a tightly packed curd to a more solid cheese, and the texture will start to take shape. Just start by lifting the cheese from the seasoned liquid and allow it to gently fall under its own weight. Do this 5 or 6 times, and as you do, you'll notice that it starts to become more malleable and it'll take a familiar shape. From here, you can start to shape it into smaller mozzarella balls, or however you want to make it. In my case, this is going to be one block of cheese that we're going to slice up pretty quickly, and everyone will have it nice and fresh. But you can expect that once you've got this finished, you can wrap it up nice and tight in just regular plastic wrap, keep it in your fridge, and it will be bright and fresh for at least 3 days. And you can expect that this will last in your refrigerator just as long as any block of mozzarella would from the grocery store. 1 gallon of milk is going to yield about a pound of mozzarella pretty consistently each time. But one of the things that you'll notice is that you have a lot of byproduct, the whey, left over. In fact, I probably have 3 to 4 mason jars, and for my project that I'm saving this for, I only really need 2 mason jars. Now don't forget, if you want to see the rich body butters that we're going to be making from these 2 mason jars, then make sure that you get the full recipes for those over at the Cottage DIY website. Now I'm just going to spend 1 more minute stretching and handling my cheese, and here you can see that I've removed the salted liquid and I'm shaping my mozzarella into serving sizes, and I'm taking my time so that you can get a good visual on the texture and you can see how the curd is changing and becoming stronger. But in reality, this process really only takes somewhere from 2 to 5 minutes. And here you can see that my final mozzarella looks just as beautiful as anything that you'd see in the gourmet section of your grocery store. This took about 25 to 30 minutes from start to finish. It's beautiful and fresh, and it's super easy to make.